fabled heat, where magic meets desire. Subscribe to ignite the fantasy.
The air in the Lord Commander's solar was thick with the scent of old leather, pine smoke, and the mulled wine steaming in 3 pewter goblets on the great oak table. Outside, the winds of the Frostfang peaks howled a lonely lament, but here, cocooned by stone walls and the heat of a roaring hearth, the world felt small enough to hold in my hands, small enough to control. It was a perfectly rendered scene. The developers of Ethelgard's Echo had outdone themselves. Across from me, Kalen, Lord Commander of the Northern Citadel, stared into the fire. The flames painted shifting patterns of gold and shadow across his hard-planed face, catching on the silver threaded through his black hair at his temples. He was the stoic warrior archetype, coded to perfection, broad shoulders straining the dark wool of his tunic, a jaw that could cut glass, and eyes the color of a winter storm. His affinity meter with my character, Lyra, was nearly full, a testament to months of careful dialogue choices and quest completions. To his left, Reese, the Citadel's loremaster and Kalen's closest advisor, leaned back in his chair, a stark contrast to his commander. Where Kalen was stone, Reese was quicksilver. His auburn hair was a messy halo in the firelight, and a knowing, intelligent smirk perpetually played on his lips. His eyes, a startling shade of moss green, were fixed on me, missing nothing. His affinity was trickier, built on wit and intellectual challenges rather than stoic approval. "The blizzard is expected to last through the week," Reese said, his voice a smooth tenor that cut through the wind's cry. He swirled the wine in his goblet. "It seems, my lady, that you are our prisoner for a while longer." I offered a smile I'd practiced in the real world's mirror, one I knew the game's facial capture would render as alluringly mysterious. "There are worse prisons, loremaster, and worse company." My gaze flicked to Kalen. It was a calculated move, designed to trigger a small spike in his jealousy-possessiveness stat, which paradoxically increased his overall loyalty. The game's algorithms were a fascinating thing. Reese chuckled a low, warm sound. "Indeed, though I imagine Kalen here makes for a rather grim jailer." Kalen's gaze finally shifted from the fire, landing on me. The sheer, unscripted intensity in his eyes was staggering. It felt heavy. It was moments like these that made Ethelgard's Echo the most immersive VR MMORPG ever created. The NPCs felt truly sentient. "You are a guest, Lyra, not a prisoner," Kalen rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together. "You are safe here." Safe, the word echoed in the quiet space. He reached across the table, his calloused fingers covering my own. The haptics in my gameplay suit were top of the line, but this was something else entirely. I felt the warmth of his skin, the textured ridges of his scars, the solid, grounding pressure of his hand. It wasn't just a vibration or a temperature shift, it was a connection. A jolt of something foreign and alarmingly real shot up my arm. My breath hitched, my heart, my actual physical heart, hammered against my ribs. I stared at our joined hands, my mind struggling to process the sensation. This was beyond any simulation I had ever experienced. I saw Reese's smile falter from the corner of my eye, his expression tightening as he watched the exchange. Another intended consequence. Pitting the two main romance routes against each other was the fastest way to unlock the hidden triad achievement. I just had to keep them both wanting, both vying for an affection I was carefully curating. Pulling my hand back a little too quickly, I gave a light, airy laugh to break the tension. "Well, I appreciate the hospitality. This whole adventure has been quite the diversion." Diversion, the word hung in the air, wrong and sharp. Kalen's expression, which had softened for a breathtaking moment, shuddered closed. The warmth vanished, replaced by a glacial cold that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He rose to his feet, his shadow devouring the room. The pewter goblet looked like a child's toy in his massive hand. "A diversion," he repeated, his voice dangerously low. Reese sat up, his playful demeanor gone, replaced by a wary stillness. I felt a sudden lurch of confusion. Did I pick the wrong dialogue option? My user interface showed no negative affinity change. All of this, Kalen gestured vaguely, not to the room, but to something larger, to the weight between the three of us. The scouting missions in the Deadwood, the night we held off the ice wraiths on the ramparts, the stories you shared with Reese in the library, me sharing my past with you. His voice cracked on the last words, a sound of such profound hurt that it felt like a physical blow. My throat went dry, I didn't know what to say. Those were quests, lore dumps, affinity-building exercises. They were beautifully rendered, emotionally resonant, but they were components of a system. wires and code and carefully crafted narrative. He took a step closer, his knuckles white where he gripped his goblet. The firelight carved deep, agonizing lines into his face. He looked broken. "Is this just a game to you?" The question was a roar of pain, of betrayal, of a heart being ripped open. It was not in the script, it was not a dialogue choice. It was raw and real, and it demanded an answer I did not have. "Because this is just a game. It is supposed to just be a game." My silence was my only reply, and in the suffocating quiet of the room, I saw something in his eyes that no programmer could ever code. I saw them break. The silence that followed Kalen's question was a living entity, a suffocating pressure that squeezed the air from my lungs. My mind, usually so quick to analyze and strategize, was a complete blank. There was no pop-up menu, no multiple-choice response to click. There was only the raw, gaping wound of his question and the two men staring at me as if I held the blade. It was Reese who moved first. He placed a steadying hand on Kalen's arm, though the commander didn't seem to notice. Reese's green eyes were sharp, analytical, but stripped of their usual mirth. They searched my face, not for a programmed response, but for a genuine one. "Kalen," Reese murmured, his voice tight. "Perhaps the lady is merely unaccustomed to the directness of northern sentiment." It was a lifeline, a way to de-escalate, but Kalen shook his head, shrugging off Reese's touch. His gaze never left mine. "No, I want to hear her answer." I opened my mouth, a dozen pre-written platitudes on my tongue. "Of course not. You mean the world to me. This is real." But the words felt like ash. Saying them would be like putting a cheap bandage on a mortal wound. And for the first time since I'd logged into Ethelgard's echo, lying felt wrong, abhorrent. My hesitation was answer enough. A sound tore from Kalen's throat, one of pure anguish, and he turned away, slamming his goblet down on the table with enough force to dent the pewter. Wine sloshed over the rim, looking like blood in the firelight. Without another word, he strode from the room, the heavy door booming shut in his wake, leaving a silence more profound than before. I finally found my breath, letting it out in a shaky gasp. My hands were trembling. "He is not a man who gives his trust lightly, Lyra," Reese said softly, his voice laced with a disappointment that was somehow sharper than Kalen's overt anger. "What he has shared with you, he has shared with no one else, not even me." I looked at him, feeling a desperate need to make him understand, to fix this. But how could I? He's just a highly advanced NPC, Reese. This is all an elaborate simulation. The words would sound like madness. "I didn't mean to," I stammered, my voice sounding weak and thin. Reese picked up a stray piece of parchment from the table, his fingers tracing the intricate script. "Didn't you? Every word you speak, every glance you give, it all seems so deliberate, so perfectly aimed. I confess I've found it fascinating. You are a master of instruments, Lyra. You just seem to forget that a man's heart is not a lute to be played and then set aside." He was too perceptive, his code was too damn good. He saw the calculation, the artifice. He was supposed to be charmed by it, not dissect it. He stepped closer, and for a moment I thought he would touch me. Instead, he stopped just out of reach, his green eyes pinning me in place. "Kalen's scars are on his skin for all the world to see. Mine," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "are less obvious." He lifted his hand not to his chest, but to his temple, brushing back his auburn hair. There, just at his hairline, was a thin, silvery scar I had never noticed before. It was not a cosmetic choice a player could make. It was a flaw, an imperfection. "A training mishap with my first tutor in thaumaturgy," he explained, his voice devoid of its usual levity. "He believed pain was the most effective teacher. I was 7. For a year, every time I tried to cast even the simplest cantrip, my mind would seize with the memory of that searing heat, the smell of my own hair burning. I nearly gave up magic entirely." He looked at me, and the weight of his unsaid words was crushing. It was as if he was asking, "This is my reality. This pain was real. What about you, Lyra? What of you is real?" My carefully constructed world was fracturing. The line between game and reality, once so clear, was blurring into a terrifying gray. The sensory input from Kalen's touch, the unscripted agony in his voice, this raw, private memory from Reese, it was too much. It was impossible. A wave of panic, cold and absolute, washed over me. I needed out, now. "Log out," I whispered, the command word soft but clear. It was the emergency vocal override. It never failed. Nothing happened. The fire still crackled. The wind still howled. Reese still watched me with those piercing, knowing eyes. My heart seized. I closed my eyes, focusing my intent, the mental trigger that always brought up my user interface, my escape hatch from this world. System command exit simulation, I said, my voice rising with panic. The room remained stubbornly, terrifyingly solid. Reese's expression shifted from disappointment to alarm. Lyra, are you well? What is simulation? I ignored him, my breath coming in ragged pants. I tried again, shouting the command word this time, a primal scream of denial against the unyielding stone walls. Log out. The only response was the frantic, terrified thudding of my own heart against my ribs. The game was not releasing me. The prison Reese had joked about had just become horrifyingly real. I was trapped. The panic was a physical thing, a clawing beast inside my chest. My vision tunneled, the edges of the cozy, firelit solar blurring into a dark, indistinct haze. The scent of pine and wine turned acrid in my nostrils. My legs gave out, and I sank to my knees on the cold flagstones, my hands braced against the floor as I gasped for air that wouldn't come. Lyra Reese was beside me in an instant, his hands hovering over my shoulders, unsure if he should touch me. What is it? A sudden affliction, a curse? His words were nonsense, fantasy jargon that my brain couldn't parse through the screaming static of my fear. Affliction, curse, no, this was a system failure, a catastrophic server error. I was a user locked in the machine. It's not working, I choked out, my voice a ragged whisper. I can't get out, the command isn't working. Get out, Reese knelt in front of me, his face a mask of profound confusion and concern. Out of where? The citadel is sealed by the storm. Just then the door creaked open. Kalen stood silhouetted in the doorway, drawn back by my shout. His face was still a thundercloud of hurt, but seeing me crumpled on the floor, it was instantly replaced by raw, visceral alarm. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, his presence eclipsing everything else. What happened? He demanded, his voice a low growl directed at Reese. I don't know, Reese replied, his gaze still locked on me. She just collapsed, she's raving, speaking in some strange tongue about commands and simulations. Kalen knelt on my other side, his big, warm hand landing on my back. The solid pressure was meant to be comforting, but it only amplified my terror. The feel of his touch was another link in the chain binding me to this place. It was too real, it was all too real. Lyra, look at me. Kalen's voice was firm, a commander's order. I shook my head, squeezing my eyes shut. If I couldn't see them, maybe they were not real. Maybe I could force the simulation to crash. Please, I sobbed, the sound pathetic and broken. Just let me go home, I need to go home. A heavy silence fell between the 2 men. I could feel their shared glance, could practically hear their minds working, trying to fit my breakdown into the context of their world. A seer's fit, possession, a madness brought on by some unknown magic. We can't leave her like this, Kalen said, his voice low and resolute. He scooped me up into his arms as if I weighed nothing. My body was limp with shock and exhaustion, my mind still screaming its useless log-out commands into the void. He carried me from the solar and through the cold stone corridors to my assigned chambers. He laid me gently on the bed, its fur coverings soft beneath me. Reese followed, lighting the candles on the nightstand, their soft glow pushing back the shadows. They stood on either side of my bed, twin sentinels of this beautiful, terrifying prison. She needs a healer, Reese said. No healer in this citadel knows of magic that causes this, Kalen countered. We will watch over her ourselves, no one else is to enter. Reese nodded in grim agreement. He pulled a chair to the corner of the room, settling in for a long vigil, but Kalen didn't move. He stood by the bed, his storm-gray eyes filled with a turbulent mix of anger, worry, and a tenderness that I had no right to. After a long while, Reese, seeing Kalen wouldn't be moved, finally left to fetch some water, leaving us in a tense, shared silence. My frantic panic had subsided into a hollow, trembling dread. I was still trapped, but the adrenaline had faded, leaving me cold and bone-weary. I curled into a ball beneath the furs. Kalen sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipped with his weight, another anchor to this reality. He did not speak. He just sat there, his presence a solid, unyielding wall against the chaos outside and the terror within. After a moment he reached out and simply rested his hand on my shoulder, his thumb stroking back and forth in a slow, rhythmic pattern. The simple, human gesture broke through the last of my defenses. A wave of despair washed over me, and I began to cry in earnest, not loud, panicked sobs, but the silent, hopeless tears of someone truly and utterly lost. He said nothing, just continued the steady, grounding motion. He did not understand my words, my fear of simulations or servers, but he understood pain. He understood despair. In that moment, he was not an NPC I was trying to romance. He was just a man offering comfort to a woman who was falling apart. My tears began to subside, my breathing evening out. The world still felt tilted on its axis, but the solid weight of his hand was a focal point, something to cling to in the wreckage. I was just starting to feel a fragile sense of calm when it was shattered. From outside the citadel walls, a horn blew, not a call for a change of the watch, but a single, piercing, urgent blast, an alarm. Kalen was on his feet in a second, his entire posture transforming from guardian to warrior. He went to the arrow-slit window, peering out into the swirling snow. "Kalen," I whispered, pushing myself up. He turned back to me, his face grim, the firelight catching the cold glint in his eyes. "Drakkar, the mountain beasts are attacking. They've never been so bold as to assault the main gate during a blizzard." He strode to the door, his duty pulling him away, but he paused, his hand on the latch, and looked back at me, his gaze impossibly heavy. The anger was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective resolve. "Whatever demons haunt you, Lyra," he said, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the stone, "they are not the only ones at our door." He left, closing the door firmly behind him. I was alone, plunged back into silence, but a new sound soon filled it, the distant, terrible clang of steel on steel, and the guttural roars of things that were no longer just pixels on a screen. They were real monsters, and they were coming. The sounds of battle were a terrifying symphony. The shriek of the Drakkar, a sound like rock grinding against glacial ice, was punctuated by the shouts of men and the sharp, percussive ring of swords meeting armored hides. Each clang, each roar that echoed through the stone walls of my chamber was a fresh wave of terror. This was not a scripted background event with cinematic camera angles. This was chaos. This was death. My player knowledge was useless. I knew the Drakkar's weak spot was a soft patch of flesh under their jaw, but that information was meaningless when I was armed with nothing but a trembling body and a mind in freefall. There was no health bar, no respawn point. There was only the thin wooden door between me and a very real, very violent end. I scrambled off the bed, backing away from the door until my shoulders hit the cold stone of the far wall. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a wild drumbeat in the sudden, awful silence that fell just outside my corridor. It was the silence of anticipation, the breath held before the strike. Then came the splintering crash. The chamber door exploded inward, ripped from its iron hinges. A Drakkar filled the frame, a monstrous nightmare of gray scales, curving tusks, and eyes that burned with a malevolent, hungry light. It was bigger than the game models, its stench, a foul mix of wet fur and carrion, a sensory detail no haptic suit could ever replicate. It lowered its head, saliva dripping from its jaws, and fixed its hateful gaze on me. A scream tore from my throat, raw and hopeless. This was it, game over, for real. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable, but the killing blow never came. Instead, I heard a familiar voice roar, "Get away from her." My eyes flew open. Kalen was there, a whirlwind of black leather and flashing steel. His greatsword, which I'd always seen as a beautifully rendered asset, was now a brutally efficient extension of his arm. He moved with a speed and ferocity that was terrifying and magnificent, his blade carving a bloody arc across the beast's flank. The Drakkar bellowed in pain and rage, swiping at him with a clawed foreleg. Kalen dodged, but at the same moment a flicker of arcane light erupted from the doorway. An ethereal chain of pure energy snaked out, wrapping around the Drakkar's leg, pulling it off balance. Rhys stood there, his hands alight with green power, his face pale with strain but set with grim determination. They fought together with a seamless, practiced grace, a dance of steel and magic. Kalen was the anchor, the raw power, forcing the beast's attention, while Rhys was the current, exploiting openings, binding and striking with pinpoint precision. It was violent, visceral, and breathtaking. Blood, black and thick, spattered across the stone floor. The Drakkar thrashed, its death throes shaking the very foundations of the room, before Kalen silenced it with a final, definitive thrust of his sword through its throat. The beast collapsed, its massive body shuddering into stillness. For a moment there was only the sound of heavy, ragged breathing. Kalen stood over the corpse, his chest heaving, his sword dripping. Reese leaned against the ruined doorframe, the light in his hands fading, leaving him looking tired and frighteningly mortal. Then their heads snapped toward me in unison. They saw me, huddled against the wall, shaking uncontrollably, my face streaked with tears. The feral light of battle faded from their eyes, replaced by the same raw concern I'd seen before. They came to me, their boots squelching in the Drakar's blood. Kalen dropped his sword with a clang and knelt, his hands framing my face, his thumbs wiping away my tears. Reese stood behind him, a protective, worried presence. "Are you hurt?" Kalen's voice was hoarse. I could only shake my head, unable to form words. The last vestiges of my denial had been slain along with the monster. The adrenaline, the sheer, primal terror of near death had burned away the comforting lie. This was real. They were real. Their pain, their fear, their bravery, it was all real. And I had treated it like a game. The weight of that realization was crushing. I looked at Kalen's face, at the small cut on his cheekbone, at the genuine, desperate fear for my safety in his eyes. I looked at Reese, who had wielded real, dangerous magic to protect me. Kalen's question from the solar echoed in my mind, no longer an accusation but a simple, heartbreaking query. "Is this just a game to you?" "No," I whispered, my voice breaking. I met his gaze, letting him see the self-loathing, the regret, the shame that was flooding me. "No, it's not a game." My voice grew stronger, fueled by a desperate need for them to understand. It was, before, I did not understand. I thought none of this was real, but I was wrong. I was so wrong. I am sorry. The confession hung in the air, simple and devastating. I did not try to explain the impossible truth of my world, of VR and simulations. I just gave them the only truth that mattered now. Kalen's expression softened, the hard lines of his face easing. The anger he had felt before was gone, washed away by the battle and my stark, terrified honesty. He did not understand what I meant, not fully, but he understood the sentiment. He understood my apology. Reese stepped forward, his mossy green eyes searching mine. "Whatever world you came from, Lyra," he said softly, "it is not this one. That much has become clear." Kalen pulled me to my feet, his hands gentle on my arms. He did not release me, keeping me steady. "Your past does not matter right now," he rumbled, his voice a low, protective vow. "What matters is that you are here, and we will keep you safe." I looked from Kalen's fierce, steady gaze to Reese's intelligent, compassionate one. They stood together, flanking me, a united front against the monsters outside and the terrifying uncertainty of my new reality. The game I had been playing was over. My old life was gone. But as Kalen's hand found mine, his fingers lacing through my own, and Reese placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, I realized I was not playing for points or achievements anymore. I was fighting for survival, and for the first time in this beautiful, brutal world, I was not alone. This was our reality now, and we would face it together.